In 1950, Ohio's residential streets were the picture of mid-century stability. Busy storefronts, clear traffic lanes, and a predictable, orderly atmosphere defined the local landscape. St. Augustine Dormitory stood at the edge of one such town until it was abruptly shuttered that same year. Official records attributed the closure to a fire, though the building's stone exterior remained largely intact. Local residents maintained that the fire was a convenient explanation for a much darker internal reality, one that the closure failed to truly contain. Generations later, Ethan, Mark, Julia, and Sarah, a group of experienced urban explorers, decided to investigate the remains. At 11 p.m., they breached the boarded windows and entered the quiet, charred hallways. Their flashlights illuminated a long sequence of dormitory doors. The numbering followed a standard pattern: 101, 102, 103, and so on, stretching deep into the darkness of the wing. This floor plan shows the structural anomaly. Numbers count upward normally until 113, then skip to 115, leaving a physical gap. Typically, this suggests a utility closet. Here, blueprints indicate a vacuum, a segment where room 114 should exist but is nowhere to be found. Sarah heard footsteps behind them, but the hallway was empty. As the group turned to run, the corridor began stretching into an impossible distance, the walls warping and elongating before their eyes. In the middle of the previously blank wall between rooms 113 and 115, the number 114 began to carve itself deeply into the plaster. The door swung open on rusted hinges. A freezing draft swept into the hallway, carrying the sound of children crying from somewhere deep inside the room. Julia pointed her camera toward the opening. Instead of a burned-out ruin, the lens captured a pristine 1950s dormitory room, perfectly preserved. The children sitting motionlessly on the beds turned their charred faces and whispered, "Stay with us." The moment the door opened, the building's internal logic shifted. The explorers were no longer in a stagnant ruin, but inside an environment that was actively reacting to their presence. The group turned to flee, but the exit doors had vanished. The hallway now terminated in solid brick where the entrance had been only minutes before. This diagram illustrates their flight through the school. Regardless of which stairs they climbed or which turns they took, the building's geography looped them back to the same point, the open door of room 114. A loud school bell suddenly rang through the hallways, and the building plunged into absolute darkness. Ethan forced the door of 114 open again, finding the room empty. This time, the wall bore a new message scrawled in red: "One must stay." The lights flickered. When they returned a second later, Mark was gone. A new line appeared on the wall: 3 left. The pattern continued in the dark. Julia vanished next, followed by Sarah, until the corridors were silent and Ethan stood alone in front of the room. Ethan fell to his knees in the center of the hallway and begged for the building to let him go. The door to 114 yielded, and a voice from the darkness granted him permission to leave. Ethan was the only one allowed back through the threshold, left to carry the memory of the 3 friends the school had claimed. Months later, Ethan was living in a modern apartment miles away from the school, attempting to distance himself from the events at St. Augustine. When his remaining friends visited his home to check on him, they found him sitting in a living room that had been physically altered. A charred institutional wooden door had manifested directly inside the modern drywall. It was marked with the same tarnished 114 plaque from the dormitory. From behind the wood, the muffled sounds of the missing children whispered through the apartment, calling Ethan to return to the room. Ethan vanished the very next day. When the police searched the apartment, they found the living room wall completely intact, with no sign of the wooden door or where Ethan could have gone. An omitted room number in a building is not always an oversight in design. If you find a missing door in your own surroundings, do not attempt to find it. The room already knows you've noticed.